Welcome to Dynamos Dozen and the Four Podmen, the podcast that we bring you each and every single week, where we talk about whatever may be on our minds, from pro wrestling, sports, entertainment, music, movies, muesli, fresh socks and jocks, and everything in between. Never forgetting that sweet white powder, which is talking powder. Don't be having dirty minds. We are here today with, my God, I mean, the word legend is overused, but in my opinion, the absolute legend, the Magnum TA is here with myself and Niall today. I can't even say anything more other than say welcome to the show and thank you for finally coming on in person, because we've obviously had a conversation in the past where it was only audio, but now people get to see your beautiful face with that beautiful beard.
well, they get to see what happens if you live past 40 and you get to continue to age what happens, which seems to be the oddity for my generation to actually cross that milestone.
I'm kind of looking at you going, if I look like that at that point, I'm all right. I'm happy with that. Welcome to the show, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Niall, this is Niall today. Just for anybody that doesn't know the background, we're going to do this on screen with Niall here. Niall has that beautiful backdrop, as you can see, with Magnum TA and the Jim Crockett promotion stuff. And Niall was a lifelong Magnum TA fan. Grew up, as you said, Niall, at about the age of 12, 13, watching that stuff as it was happening, the way a lot of people watch Raw and SmackDown as it was happening. So I know this was a huge deal for you. So Niall, come on in.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a massive privilege for me, Magnum. Really appreciate getting the opportunity to share the screen with you. I was that 12-year-old boy in Ireland, and of course, you know, Ireland, we're sort of neutral by nature.
Mm-hmm.
But I was engrossed in the depths of this Cold War stuff, the Reagan Gorbachev era, and you guys playing it out on screen and all with Nikita and stuff like that. I was a huge Nikita fan, huge Magnum fan, Dusty, all those guys. And I always say to people, when people come on to me now and they give out to me about wrestling and things that happen in wrestling, you'll if you hear back any of our episodes, I always go back and talk about Jim Crockett Promotions and how much I loved it. And that I watched both WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions, but WWF was kind of that show that I seen over there. But Jim Crockett Promotions always gave me my wrestling fix that I needed. So I really loved it. Big, huge fan of your work, and most of the guys working there at that time was just phenomenal.
Well, it was a pleasure, and and it was like we were in a war. Yeah, Dusty always plugged it as basically we were in this battle between us and the WWE. A lot of times we'd be in the same town on the same night, sold out in two different buildings, giving them a marketably different product than what the WWE represented. And it wasn't anything that was bad about it. Obviously, there was enough people out there that enjoyed both products that they wanted to, you're selling out. If you got 30, 40,000 people in one town coming out to see wrestling in one night, that tells you, there's a lot of hungry people out there that like all that sports entertainment thing. But for us, we were so adamant about portraying a contest in a the heritage of where wrestling came from back for Lou Thesz and before him, and just that different style that was an art form in and of itself that got lost somewhere in the translation of making it just sports entertainment. So that's the thing about it, that I don't know that they will ever be able to recapture that magic, because once it's like the magician show watching. I went to Vegas and saw Siegfried and Roy back in the day, but if somebody had told me how they did everything that I saw, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. And people that came to see wrestling back then, they might have watched 2 or 3 matches and seen through something and thought, oh, that was a little hokey. But if they saw me and Tully absolutely killing each other, or Nikita and I, laying everything in the way we did, and sweat and blood flying and all those kind of things, then we always had that thing, they're walking out, they're talking about it. They say, I don't know about all those other ones, but those guys there, those guys were getting after it. And that was always the goal for me every night, because that's the school I came from. That's what I grew up watching that I like Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniels for the Silver Quarters back when I was a kid watching them. And if you watch those two guys chopping each other, smacking the crap out of each other, there wasn't any second guessing that hurt. And those are two big men, getting after it. So that was what I wanted to portray. And honestly, never had any idea that I was just going to have a 7-year window of opportunity to do what I did. But obviously it left an impact, because we're still talking about it 30 some years later.
What's really cool about that, I have to say, Magnum, because we talked about this on the last show, but it was the audio version, and there's been maybe 2 years in between. I've thought about something just as you said that. And on the last show, you talked about how you got into pro wrestling and how it began for you. It was a 7-year window. And I know from myself as well, I was only in it for a minute, but I never achieved that and that you did. But I know being in it, and I know the drug and the adrenaline that it causes, regardless of, whether there's TV cameras on or not, it's a very special feeling. You know what I mean? No matter what level it's on. For you, explain to people again, now that we have you on camera, how you actually got into it. So, because it was a great story.
Well, I was a fan, as I said, growing up, and I was actually going to Old Dominion University and wrestling in college. And simultaneously, while I'm going to college, I'm bouncing in nightclubs in Virginia Beach. So I start meeting guys that were coming in. They would come in after the show, whatnot. And I had never really thought about it as a career path, so to speak. But they did this article in the Chesapeake paper where I grew up. And it outlined the kind of money these guys were making back in, this was the 70s now, late 70s, when I'm finding out about all this. And they're making 6 figures. And back then that was just unheard of money, because the average guy was lucky to make, $20,000 a year, back in those days. So I saw it as an opportunity. I had been working out in the gym with a bunch of muscle heads, had gone from 167 pounder that I graduated high school at to about 220 pounds, and I was still getting bigger. And I went down to the Crockett's deal, and they had Gene Anderson, they had guys, setting everybody up to stretch them. So I did this, I did this workout thing with them and all this stuff. And just the month before I'd gone down there, I got 2 Dobermans. And they were living in the house with me, and I have allergies I didn't have any idea to these dogs. So my respiratory system was all jacked up. Sure. So I get down there, and they get me to do 500 Hindu squats and a couple hundred push-ups and all this stuff. And then I see them bringing these guys in, and I'm going, wait a minute, I'm dead. These guys are all fresh. They want me to get in the ring. And so I went outside and sat down on a hill, because I'm smart. I work, I work security. I'm street smart. I'm not some mark off the street. And Gene comes out there and grabs me by the arm. He said, come on back in here. And I pulled the arm back. I said, no. I said, you don't really want me to come back in there. And he said, why? And I said, because if you wanted me to have a fair contest to see what I'm capable of doing, this isn't it. And he doesn't know me. I mean, I had a gun in my car. If I thought somebody was trying to, I'd want to come in there and ventilated everybody, for lack of a better word. So, I get in my car, go back home, and I said, well, this isn't the right approach. But I've got to be friends with Greg Valentine, a couple of different guys I see in the club. And Buzz Sawyer comes to me and says, hey, you got great potential, blah, 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 blah. So to make a long story short, I'm not going to go into the long Buzz Sawyer story.
Oh, listen, we know, everyone knows about Buzz Sawyer.
Yeah, because you got to put the past in the past sometime. But the interesting thing was, so he goes to Portland, Oregon, and to work for Don Owens, and he gets me to pick up his little brother from down in Florida and drive him over to Mid-South, which I do. And there, when I'm in Mid-South, I meet Jimmy Garvin, and I sleep on their couch in their apartment for a month, and I'm driving back and forth around the towns with them. I'm not working. I haven't been in the ring one time yet, but I'm watching. I'm soaking it all in. I meet Grizzly and meet different guys that were working there for Bill behind the scenes. So finally, one night after one too many cocktails, probably, I tell Jimmy Garvin this whole story of what's transpired with Buzz and I. He said, "Brother, if I were you," he said, "I would get in my car and I would be on his doorstep and say, 'When am I starting to work?'" And so that's what I did. I got in my car. I drove from Louisiana all the way across to LA. I drove LA all the way up to Vancouver, Washington, where he had an apartment. I knocked on his door. I said, "I'm here." And so he tells Don, "I've been working for Bill." Well, back then they didn't have the internet. They didn't talk all the time. Things weren't tight knit like they would be today. So he doesn't check out anything. And Buzz takes me down to the ring at the Sportatorium deal day, which was a bowling alley, and had a ring set up. And I worked out for 2 hours in the ring with him and Princess Victoria. Learn how to hit the ropes, grab a headlock, take a hip toss, give a hip toss, all these little things. 2 hours, hard as I can go. The next night, I wrestled Buzz on TV in Portland live, first match ever. And they booked me 7 days a week from there on out. I learned everything I learned in the ring, on the ropes. Nobody knew that I was green as the grass outside, and then I didn't know a wrist lock from a wristwatch. And, and it couldn't happen today. I mean, you could not break it in business like that. No way. And I mean, there was guys there like the Barbarian. He was just starting. He was new. He was Tonga John. Him and I beat the holy crap out of each other, because again, I was a amateur wrestler and state champion and everything, and worked bouncing and fighting in clubs, and now I'm trying to learn this wrestling work thing and make it look believable. And it was insanity what I did over the next year and a half trying to learn the ropes.
Noel?
Yeah. What was it like that first night getting in with Buzz? How was the nerves?
Well, I didn't have enough sense to be afraid of anything. First of all, I mean, to me, I'd watched it my entire life. I knew it was supposed to be a certain way. I didn't know the right way to go about doing it. To give you an example of not doing the right way, one of my, the third week in the business, they put me in the ring with Gene Kaninsky, who was the former NWA champion, great big rough rugged Gene Kaninsky, right? And he picks me up, drops me behind him, and tells me to roll him up. I don't know what a roll up is. He's talking to me to push him in the ropes and roll him up, for a false
He's
finish.
calling it in the ring, and you're going, "What the fuck is a roll up?"
I'm behind him. I got him, so I waist locked him and belly to back suplexed him on his head. And he came to the back and he was laughing. He thought that was the funniest thing. He said, "The kid threw me on my head."
He threw me on my head.
Yeah. And luckily, there was a bunch of big, rough, rugged, tough son of a guns where I'd have killed half the people that I worked with that first 6 months, because I did not know.
Do you think that somebody, this is a question I've always wanted to ask you, actually, because I listened back to the previous podcast, and obviously we talk all the time. I don't ask you these things, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you was purely based on your experience before you got into the ring. Do you think that people, as in the workers, like the Gene Kaniskys, like the Buzz Sawyers, like all these people, they kind of saw something tough in you and said, "This kid has got some toughness that we can." For example, the reason I asked this question is because that some other people wouldn't have been afforded that type.
Yeah. And they saw me in the back then, the bouncing world, being a bouncer in a club, just like the Road Warriors were. And when you came from that, the 70s was really a brutal place to be in that profession, and what happened and what went on every night in those clubs. I mean, we were right there with the Norfolk Naval Base, and I had Navy guys and college guys and rugby players and longshoremen and all these people coming in, getting drunk and getting in fights. And And every night of the week was a Pier 6 brawl. Almost you could set your watch by it. And so I think when you came out of that world, and then if you had an amateur background or something, but some kind of athletic background to go along with it, and they could see that spark of there might be some charisma in this box here if we shake it up just right and let it go. That's what the guys had the vision to see. Ole had the vision to see it, in the Road Warriors. Buzz saw it in me. I mean, guys, were able to have that kind of insight probably because I had, I was down there with a half a dozen other guys that were, my size, but didn't have the extrovert part of them. Maybe you have to go along with it because, you could be the toughest guy on the planet, but if you don't have the chops for the theatrics to go along with it and the be able to talk the smack and do everything else you need to do, then you don't have the whole package.
Yeah, I suppose like you could look at someone like a Dynamite Kid who I talk about very fondly on this podcast, and I'm very friendly with his daughters and his brother. He's the same, isn't he? Like that's the epitome of what you're saying, like everything bar the chops. But as you said, it was a different time. You didn't need to be a promo guy back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so it was a different era, and it was a different time, and the business and kayfabe was king back then. I mean, to get in the business was like trying to. I mean, you had a better chance of trying to walk on the NFL than a tryout, than to break in the wrestling business, and on a grand scale. I mean, you might break in and be a jobber, but to break in and have a chance to be a main eventer, they considered you paid 10 years of dues before you even had an opportunity of being a main event, caliber person. Guys wouldn't even talk to you or give you that consideration or thought or anything unless there was some respect level that you had met within the the organization itself. And it was with all the territories and all, I mean, from every single promotion had someone that was looking at people as being potential dollar signs and being able to carry their company and put people in seats and protect the business while you're doing it. Because it's like, I don't know if you ever talked with Tony Atlas, but I mean, he'll tell you too that if you weren't tough and you couldn't protect the business, if they were to make you a champion and you're representing whichever organization you're with as the champion, and you might go get your butt kicked on the street somewhere, that wasn't happening. Yeah. You would not be afforded that position if you couldn't protect the business.
Yeah.
Noel? They really checked you out, didn't they, before they put a card on you, really, didn't they? They made sure it was like this wasn't going to go wrong in any way. And it's amazing when you talk about kayfabe there. I often say to Ian, I'm still recovering from the day that I found out Nikita wasn't Russian. And it's just amazing. It's crazy when you think about it. Like, it's just crazy, but definitely, yeah, it's what I say to people, it's probably the toughest apprenticeship in terms of a job that anyone will ever take on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nikita was such a great foil for me because he was equally as dedicated to his character as Al was invested in mine. So that's why at that stage and when that all came together and Dusty dreamed up what we were going to do with that, the chemistry was so right on.
I have a question for you actually, Magnum, because for some reason when I was a kid, now I'm a little bit younger than Noel, not much younger, but I'm a little bit younger. So I do remember seeing your stuff in the magazines and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I was drawn to the look. I don't know what it was. Obviously the big mustache and the kind of, the mullet and whatever you might call it. I hope I'm not offending you with the mullet. But,
no, not at all. Well, see, I came up with that hairstyle before anybody knew what a mullet was.
Yeah, I was like,
to me, it was a thing of function because you needed the visual of people seeing you from a long distance, the long hair and the blonde hair and all that stuff played really well to that. But as an athlete, I didn't want hair in my face, and so I purposely cut the sides short. I kept the top where it would stay back, and I had this, I may be the grandfather of the mullet. I may have originated it and not even known it, but I did it totally for a functional reason.
1990s Shawn Michaels owes you some money.
You should have trademarked it.
You should have trademarked it.
I didn't even know what it was. I'd never heard that word until after I'd had my accident. I was laying in the hospital reading. I said, "What's a mullet?"
No, but there was, all joking aside, like you look at some of the sidebars there that Niall has there, like you look at, you were a specimen. Like you did look like a big, I mean, DDP wished he looked like you at that point. When you saw DDP coming back in the day. But what I'm getting at is it seemed to be just such a natural fit for you, didn't it? It was just something that just clicked, and that was it. You were off to the races.
It did, and what happened, I was able to get in a real comfortable place with my character. So the name Magnum TA came from Andre the Giant. I think I might have told you this before, but I was working in Florida, and him and I were having breakfast, and we had gotten to be friends because I drove him around over the years when I always had a big car when he came to the territory, and he rode with me. Just one of the greatest guys ever. But he, sitting at breakfast, looked over at me, and I'd been in the business 3 years at this point. And he said, "Kid," he said, you're ready for something big." He said, "But you need a handle." That was his word, a handle, like a CB handle. And I said, "Okay." He said, "You kind of look," and my hair was shorter back then, and I wore a lot of Hawaiian shirts back in the day when I was in Florida. He said, "You look like that guy on TV." He said, "You should be Magnum TA." So he came up with the name, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the character was going to be. I didn't know anything about it. And his idea was he was going back up to Vince Sr., and he was going to bring me into the WWE or WWF back then. But before he could get all that done, the script flipped because Paul Orndorff left Mid-South. He went to the WWE, left a big gaping hole in their roster. Ernie Ladd calls me in the middle of the night, says, "Hey, come over here." I go there. I take on the name Magnum TA. All that long story to say, I didn't know what Magnum TA, the star now on this higher level, really was going to be. And I honed that through the year and a half that I was there in Mid-South. I found the character. I found the rough, tough baby face, hard talking, hard hitting, still could be taken advantage of by a heel that would dastardly get the heat, because selling is always where the baby face is at its best, whether you're a tough guy or not. You got to be able to fight from the bottom up.
Yep.
So I built this character there, honing it, fine tuning it. So when I came to the Crockett's, now Magnum, who nobody had seen because I wasn't on a national level yet, because the television thing, now when I pop on the scene on TBS, and like I'm born out of nowhere, but really I've got thousands of matches under my belt as a mature character. And what I was a precursor to what Steve Austin got to take to a different level, knocking Bob Geigel on his butt, and the president of the NWA was a huge, thing for a babyface character to do. And the only true ally that I aligned myself with was Dusty. So Dusty and I were this enigma, this thing called America's Team, whatever. But I wasn't like running around with the Rock and Roll Express and the this guy and that guy, whatever. I wasn't like lost in that shuffle. I was kind of a lone wolf, except for my relationship with Dusty. So I would have eventually even upped the ante on that even more, the direction that we were going, after I got in the seat of the world title.
And that's a really good thing that you said there about like you were kind of the precursor to Stone Cold Steve Austin, because for a lot of people that don't understand the character of what Magnum TA is, you know, it's like, who is Bret the Hitman Hart? Who is the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels? It's like, what makes them be that person? That is pretty much what you were. You were just a badass that was willing to, to fight the bad guys and just basically whoop their ass, straight up. That's pretty much right.
And and Eddie Graham taught me a long time ago that no matter how over you were, every time you got in a ring in a new arena, you had to reestablish who you were by the way you what you did in the ring, how you interacted with the fans, as if they'd never seen you before, because you had to stay true to that character 24/7, and you had to reestablish it each and every time. So if you're a brawler or a fighter or whatever, you had to do that same thing to make the heel do what they had to do to get the advantage, to give you that opportunity to fight from the bottom up. And it was a psychology that we played out over and over and over again. 8-month program with Tully. Who has an 8-month program with anybody today?
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Noel, you should.
Apologies about that, man. The power just went in the house there, so I had to get down and troop.
That's okay.
But I'm back, as they say. What have I missed?
Well, basically, we were talking about, he was talking about, he was the precursor to the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. Like, he was the babyface that was just a badass that's willing to whoop your ass, no questions asked, but able to work and sell that babyface. Like, can I ask you a question? Myself and Noel always talk about this. I always think, when you hear that conversation about Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, who's the greatest of all time, blah, blah, blah. I go back and I look at Bret Hart being able, that selling ability, it all looked real. You know what I mean? Just real. Like, and I've talked to like numerous guys, like Nikita as well was on the show. I was like, Nikita, like, kind of picks Bret Hart every time. You know what I mean? Because it's like, that's real work. It looks like he's getting hurt here. And the fight. So what say you?
Well, as far as in ring bell time to bell time work, there's two different schools of thought. Yep. So Bret Michaels had unbelievable psychology. He was almost too good to me. And I say too good, like Ricky Steamboat, unbelievable artist, right?
Yeah.
Like him and Flair, it's like watching a waltz.
It's
right?
Beautiful.
Beautiful thing of beauty. But it lacks to me because of my believability thing. I want something that looks raw in the mix of that. If all the flow and the exchange and the beautiful arm drags and the drop kicks and all that stuff doesn't somewhere in there have something that looks like a potato that knocks somebody's head into the third row, then it lacks something to me. So I would say Bret Hart probably had the ability to work like that, more rugged style. Mm-hmm. And honestly, and him and I have talked about it briefly the few times we've met, because I would have loved to work with him. Yeah. I mean, it would have been a night off to work with Shawn, just like a night off to work with Flair. I mean, easy peasy, no doubt about it. But I had to turn the knob down when I worked with someone like that, because I could beat the crap out of Nikita and Tully, and they knew it. They expected it. They expected the physicality. They knew there wasn't anything that I would do to them that I'd expect them to do back to me. I mean, we were knocking each other's teeth out or busting eyes open and stuff like that, but everything was solid. It was snug. It was like when we were fighting down on the floor, you were in my face, you could not tell, because I threw everything at Mach 7 velocity, and my fist would just be a little loose instead of tight as it could be. And I, it was popping. It was making connection. Tully used to make a joke that he had a speech impediment for a year and a half after he worked with me from me. But to your point, I would say, Bret would certainly have to be be one of the top picks as far as in ring. But then you mix the other part, and even, and I love Stone Cold, but I watch back his stuff, and I watch his punches, and I watch his things. And
very loose.
And he looked like a little, loose working punch. I mean, it was exciting, but I watched like that brawl that him and Booker T had in the grocery store, and I'm thinking, if that'd been Tully and I'd have had the whole store flattened out, and we would have just, I mean, it may not have been the same entertainment comedic factor, some of the stuff that they had, but we would have destroyed the place and ourselves in the process, on doing it. And I think that's kind of where that mixed thing comes from. I think Bret came out of the dungeon. So, I mean, up there in Calgary. So, obviously he had, that hard hitting believability factor. And I'm really stretched right now to try to think of anybody that could do the kind of moves and the technical wrestling he could do and still make the believability there. I mean, I think Chris Benoit could do it too. I think Chris.
But then again, Chris Benoit is basically a carbon copy of Dynamite Kid, right? You know what I mean? Yeah,
and up a notch in terms of the high flying capability.
Sure.
Just because everything always is evolving and changing. But yeah, I mean, like Dynamite and the British Bulldog were like, they set a bar. And he paid the price for it. I mean, his body was destroyed from what he did to it in the ring. God bless him.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I would have a hard time coming up with a guy. Terry Funk, another guy. Terry Funk.
There you go.
There's a guy. There's my guy. That's my era. So I grew up there, and you watch Terry Funk. And I mean, I worked with Dory a bunch when I was in Florida, and Dory was, so slow, methodical, deal. And then Terry was he had timing that was just nuts. And, that's my guy. I'm going to put mine on Terry.
I have an excerpt, I think it's called, from a book. It's actually Dynamo Kid's book, believe it or not, because I knew you were going to talk about Mr. Funk. And Dynamite Kid said that pound for pound, Terry Funk is the best. He could wrestle a broomstick and make it look believable. That's literally what he said. And I mean,
yeah, I had to concur with that because Harley was believable in a different kind of way. Harley was, I only got to work with Harley one time, actually, one match. In the ring, and Harley measured me. Harley tested me.
How tough was Harley?
He was everything they said he was. I mean, he
and more.
And when I worked with him, he was, in the end of his in-ring career. I can't even imagine him 10 years younger. Holy crap! I mean, I would have loved it, but I mean, he was. If you went and did an hour with Harley, I have a feeling you knew you'd been in the ring with a man. It wasn't a question of did you go do a waltz. You would have been in there with a man. But Harley calls a spot and tells me to leapfrog him. And Harley was 6'1", 6'2". He wasn't a little guy, and I could see in his eyes when he came off that rope that he wasn't ducking. I could tell. There was going to be no duck. There wasn't even going to be a nod. If I did not get over that head, I was going to go ass over tea kettle, and it was going to be the biggest cluster of all flipping time. And I somehow managed to leap over his head, and he went under, and we did the spot. But it was like, I said, you just wanted to see if I could really do it, aren't you?
Brilliant.
Noel?
Yeah, you were talking there about your work with Tully, and I go back and I look at NWA stuff every week. I will go back through years and series and stuff like that, and I always look at your work and I always think it was great the way, like, Tully was a brilliant dance partner for you because he was so rugged and there was a nastiness to him and stuff like that. So it was great the way you were able to work together, and those sort of little knees off the ground. If you look at the I Quit match, he'd hit you with those knees to the solar plexus, and it was always like you always incorporated those moves that you would think would happen if you were in a bar brawl or a street fight or something.
A real fight, yeah.
Yeah, so the believability of it was absolutely huge, you know.
And we did things that, you know, we didn't ever talk about. I mean, obviously we knew the finish of where we were going to go with the match, but we never talked before matches. We didn't have anything laid out, and that was all spontaneous. We didn't know that chair was going to be the gimmick. We didn't know it was going to break like that and make that horrendous looking weapon at the end of it. I mean, we didn't, you know, it was just the magic that all came together after, you know, all those months and months and months of work. And again, he had such an intensity that literally anybody else I worked with, aside from him, I had to turn the knob down like three notches, because you could be kicking his butt and he would be coming up so fast for another that you'd give him a bump. And if you threw a drop kick or you did something where you went off your feet, you better be getting up quick, because he's going to be feeding you for something else. Yeah. I mean, just like that. I mean, bam, 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 bam. Yeah. There was no wear out to him. I was in the best shape of my life after that program.
Yeah.
Do you think he's underrated as a wrestler, Tully Blanchard? Or do you think?
I think he is, and I think that my you know, me coming out of the game, you know, unceremoniously at 27 because of the accident, messed his career up, because his only big single run that was, you know, and I say only, I mean, you know, it's one of the greatest feuds in history. So it's not that it's that he just had that, but he never got to have that with anybody else.
Yeah.
In a one-on-one type deal. And I have no doubt that, you know, him and I could have gone round and round over the world's title and had just insanity, you know, all over again, because he was that good and he was that believable. And people just knew we hated each other, that it was just going to be, if we were in the same room, something was going to explode. So it would have been really good. So I hate it that he didn't get to, my son's taking off over waving at him. I hate it that he didn't get to explore more of his singles career, because you just don't get the same recognition being part of a tag or a faction as you do when you have those individual feuds and careers for whatever reason.
Well,
Magnum, what was it like in Jim Crockett's at the time, where all you guys were in there? Like, it was a who's who of the business in terms of every level, from US
Flair
title, tag team, Road Warriors, you know, the Garvins were in there, Jimmy and Ron, and, you know, all this array of amazing talent to work with. What was it like in there at the time?
It was amazing, and I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to tell you one other guy that totally got lost in the shuffle too, and that's Jimmy Garvin. Jimmy and I were in a feud that had just started, and it wasn't going to be the end game, because I was getting ready to go get the world title. But Jimmy Garvin and I around the world title, Jimmy was one of the most brilliant workers in the ring of all flipping time, and he didn't get his due either.
Fact.
But
yeah.
But to go back to your, as far as the locker room, the camaraderie, that team, there was 200 of us working for the Crockett's, 200 people, and everybody could go. From the opening match to the main event. You know, there was not a soft spot on that card. You know, it had really got, because what had happened when I left Mid-South, I was like the Pied Piper. When I left, they all started following. You know, here comes the Rock and Roll Express. Here comes the Midnight Express. Here comes Terry Taylor. Here comes Buddy Landell. Here come, you know, they all just kept coming and following right along behind. And, you know, our roster was so deep that we could run 3 towns a night and draw money in every one of them.
And what was it like from a booking point of view? Because from the outside looking in with all this talent, you would think it's an absolute booking dream. But I would think it was probably a booking nightmare as well, because all these guys were so good. Like,
I think it was, and I think Dusty, you know, gets thrown some bad bones over that because there was so many and there was so much television product to come up with a week, angles. I mean, you've got, obviously you've got input coming from the talent. I mean, you've got, the Horsemen and all of us sitting around, shooting the breeze, talking about stuff. Dusty and I traveled every day together, and we're constantly talking over ideas and concepts and things while we're going up and down the road. But it was the talent pool was just so deep that what could be done was only limited to your imagination. So if anything, it was truly a goal. The thing that was a downfall of all of it in my mind was twofold. One, when I came to work for the Crockett's and the contracts came into being, I was part of the first group of guys. There was 5 of us that got a real contract that guaranteed you more than $50 a night. I mean, there was 5 of us, and my contract guaranteed me an over 6 figures, which was a guarantee, not a salary, that at the end of the year I hadn't made X, they'd make it right. Well, that was an incentive. And so for me, every night I performed, I was making more than what that guarantee would have broken out in if you figured it out 52 weeks a year. When I crashed, there wasn't a plan B. So they went into total panic mode. Here you are, you got your 27-year-old star that you're getting ready to hang the moon on and be the moniker for your whole business. And I go down. So there wasn't we can do this or we can do that. That's when they brought the Road Warriors in. That's when they brought Lex Luger and Sting and all these guys. And instead of doing the incentive contract, they did a guarantee contract that ended up being just that. Every 2 weeks, you're going to get X. Well, when you take that carrot away, I don't care how much business you're doing. If you don't know that, hey, if I'm on the main event on a $100,000 house and I can make, $7,000-8,000 in one night, or I'm on a pay-per-view that I can make $20,000 or $30,000 in one night, you take away those carrots, it messes with the performance and the thought processing of the talent.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you got a bunch of guys, they got a payroll that would choke an elephant, and they weren't expanding into other areas like worldwide merchandising and other avenues that would bring other revenue streams in the company. And all of a sudden they're upside down in debt. And even though they're selling out every night and they're doing pay-per-views, they didn't have somebody outside come in and show them how to take it up to that next level, like the WWE did.
Yeah.
And consequently, they front loaded it so heavy that they didn't have any choice but to do what they did. So it wasn't like just booking and say, oh, well, they should have booked it better. It wasn't that. This was the business model got broke because they got into a panic mode, which I don't blame them. If I'd been sitting there and I was the Crockett family and saw what happened to me happen, I might have panicked too, and not know what to do to, not, make the golden goose go drown.
Do you think, Noel, I'll let you come in again. I just wanted to ask this one question based off that. Do you think, based off the fact that it was all based on the Carney days, do you know what I mean? Because that was the locker room talk. That was the whole way. It was all Carney. It was still the way. Do you think that they kind of figured that this kind of way of doing business will last forever, and that nobody will ever kind of figure out how to make it better? Or do you think it was just kind of more ineptness on the part?
I think it was the curse of being the small family business. Sure. That went from mediocrity to maybe doing, having their best year being $1 million.
That makes sense. Yeah.
To all of a sudden having this thing they did. I think the number Dusty told me was like, we did $27 million in paid arena attendance in 1 year. Just arena business, not any merchandising, not anything, just arena business back in the 80s. So when you got a small group and a family who's been in business for 50 years and they see it come up to here, to them, cash is flowing like, you get a faucet turned on.
Yeah.
And I don't think, they were getting the right, input from any outside sources, because they weren't probably seeking that kind of thing. So they were trying to do it all internally. I think that's really what kind of laid the groundwork for the fall, and them having to sell to Turner Broadcasting, which was just a fiasco in and of itself, until they had the big push with the Monday Night Wars and all that stuff. But nonetheless, to me, that's where it all kind of took a curve. And another place that took a curve was when you saw it go from the 10 pounds of gold to the big gold belt. Does anybody ever talked about the significance of that?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because the 10 pounds of gold was the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, right? The big gold belt, didn't represent having to pay 10% to the NWA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hold the 10 pounds of gold. That big gold belt didn't mean doodly squat to me personally. The 10 pounds of gold, the belt that Harley Race held, Dory Funk held, all the way back, Jack Briscoe, that was the belt.
Yeah.
And so when it turned into a business decision that the world's champion, we don't want to give away 10% of the income being generated every time we use the world's champion. That took away a little of the flavor of it too.
Noel, you definitely need to come in on some of this, because your mind is blown right now.
Yeah, I want to touch on the best of 7 with Nikita.
Okay.
And we have to talk about that. But
that's his favorite subject.
Before we get into the best of 7, we have to talk about the build up to it. The press conference with the Russians with your mum. How did that all come about? And the talk is that the mum hadn't been, had you or hadn't you clued the mum into the business at that stage?
Not at all. No clue.
She had no idea about what was going to happen.
None. It is really, it's really, my mom passed away, God bless her, a little over a year ago. But my mom was like my biggest fan. I'm an only child. And, so she's this huge fan. And Dusty had had me do a video with her and really put her in a, really great light, because he, like I said, he kind of portrayed me as a lone wolf, but he wanted me to have this soft side too for my mom. And so, we'd done this video with her, like me running down the beach and come to see my mom and all this stuff, and really, made her feel really all nice and warm and fuzzy. And then after all that, we say, hey, we'd like you to come to Charlotte. We're going to do this signing thing, and we'd like you to be there because Ivan's going to be there with Nikita. I think it'd be appropriate. She's all good, and we didn't smarten her up at all. So when we're all sitting there at the conference table, and Nikita, says the key word, I think calls me a mama's boy or something, and I come over the deal, she sells it unbelievably, and as only someone could do that was in shock. And it was great, and we didn't even smarten her up then, because people came in and got Nikita and Ivan out of the room, and she never knew till way after what really went down. And we got some laughs out of that over the years after.
I can just imagine the mum there, and the two Russians are kicking you silly, and she's just there. This is my son. It must have been amazing.
Where's George Bush? Help me.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, there was a Cold War going on, and I mean he was hated. I mean, my gosh, the people, he had heat, nuclear heat, and and when things kept getting more and more and more heated, and we did the deal, with Geigel, stripping me of the title, and it was just a perfect setup. I mean, it was really, even Bill, we had Bill Apter involved in it. He interviewed me, and I, walked out on him because he asked me something. I mean, it was built up perfect. And Nikita was such a, Nikita was about 285, 290 back then. He was an absolute monster.
He was a beast, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the believability factor with him was a 12. Anybody that saw him in person and saw him hit somebody with a Russian sickle, they believed it. Yeah.
And we were speaking of snug work earlier. That punch to Bob Geigel, good Lord.
That was a good one. And yeah, and
that was a good one.
Yeah, I knew Bob was a rugged guy, and he wasn't fragile, and I wasn't worried about him breaking. And I warned him ahead of time. I said this could be a little snug.
You might get done with this one.
Yeah, when you go back and you look at it, you see him hitting that back curtain when you hit him with it.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Yeah, absolutely. And then we move on into the bones of the best of 7. So you go 3 down, and then the comeback is on. This is the Rocky Balboa Ivan Drago storyline, really, isn't it?
Noel, just on that, can I say, because you're actually at the bringing something to me, I was a huge fan, especially in the WCW days, like the early days when I started getting into pro wrestling. I loved the best of 7. How important were those best of 7s as well? Like, answer Noel's question, I'm just more so like that. I love the idea of it. That's all.
And it was the first one. So it all came off. Flair and Dusty were huge basketball fans, and every year, every year Flair was either a Lakers fan or a Chicago Bulls fan, and Dusty was a Boston Celtics fan.
He tends to change his opinion pretty quick, doesn't he?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Flair went with whoever was against the Celtics. So anyway, that's where the best of 7 came from. The idea for it. And of course, to your point, fighting from the bottom up. I mean, Nikita, and it was funny because Nikita was like, he got the wins, and I remember us going through, where the ones where I'm coming back and winning, and of course, when he won, there would always be some, something controversial about the way he won. When I won, it would be right in the middle of 1, 2, 3 of some sort. And I remember one time he was doing I was going to win it with like a sunset flip or something. He wanted Tommy Young to kick his hands off the ropes, and Dusty said, "Oh no, it doesn't work like that. A babyface doesn't win because of a fluke." I said, "You don't do that." And then of course, so it was a good deal. And then when it took Ivan. It took Ivan and Crusher and Nikita to beat me in the last one, in the last match, which is so ironic too, because I won the U.S. title from Wahoo in Charlotte Coliseum in a steel cage match, sold out. I lost the U.S. title to Tully in Charlotte in a sold out arena that got nuclear heat, and then I lost in the best of 7 in Charlotte in the final match in Charlotte, and again nuclear heat, and all 3 of those guys involved, and it was absolutely crazy. So Charlotte has got some amazing history in it for the Crockett organization.
Yeah,
it was on I'll just give a little sideway. My first time in the United States, we obviously had to travel to Charlotte before we got to Orlando. And there was this really nice, big lady, but she was really nice. She was one of the cabin crew, and she comes up and she goes, "Hey guys, do you want any more drinks?" And I was like, "Well, I'm from Ireland, so I'll have all the drinks, Don't give me one of those little mini cans. Give me 3 of them, And but she comes
they didn't
up,
have any Guinness stout though, did they?
Damn right, you know what I mean. So I was sitting there and I turned around. I swear to God, we literally just landed in Charlotte, and I turned around and I was like, "Well, the NWA, Ric Flair, woo!" Of course, I was doing that because I had a few beers, and she was like, "Oh, Ric Flair was just on this plane the other day," and I was like, "You're kidding me? Where is he? Where are you hiding him?" But yeah, they all, even like she said, like all the guys and the girls know him. You know what I mean? He's kind of in and out. So Charlotte is just like, it's so synonymous with old school professional wrestling.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was just I couldn't believe when because these were live events as well, weren't they, Magnum? These were all live events. It wasn't TV.
Yeah.
And it was about putting bums in seats, really, wasn't it? More so than anything else. But talk to me about the fur coats.
About the what?
The fur coats.
Oh, well, that was there was some alcohol involved in that, and we Dusty and I are in Vegas, and we were in, where was it? Caesar's Palace, and there was a fur shop in there called Ray Lenoble Furs. There you go, Ray Lenoble Furs. And so Dusty and I had one too many cervezas, and Flair was on one of his, deals about all his money, this, that, and the other. And so Dusty and I, on a whim, decide we walk into this fur shop, and they're all over us, and they say, we're gonna get full length coyote, long haired coyote fur coats, custom made, $7,200 a piece in 1985, and so I guess we actually gave them a deposit or something. And next thing I know, they flew out from Vegas to Charlotte to do a test fitting because they had made them. And so we ended up having to buy these things. And anyway, we wore them on TV, and, wore them a couple of times. And it was like wearing a blooming electric blanket. They were so.
I'm wearing it for you. This is for you, Magnum.
Yeah. So anyway, it was quite the conversation piece, and it was really just a rib because we were trying to make Flair look funny, look silly.
You told me that, yeah. You were trying to make him look like an ass.
Yeah. And it worked. We got our moments.
What was it like behind the scenes? Sorry, I need to ask that now. What was it like behind the scenes with Flair? Would he laugh at something like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he laughed, and Flair spent so much money on clothes. It was absolute insanity. I mean, every time he came to Atlanta, I think he spent a couple $1,000s on shoes.
Taking this off me now.
Fancy shoe store that he went to, and everything else. But we weren't quite as in fashion, so to speak, as he was. And I'm glad, because I wouldn't have been comfortable in that role.
No. I think I watched one of the matches that I watched with you and Rick was actually in Texas, in the stadium. And there was one thing that I noticed, because when I talked to you and you talked about the whole deal that you were only in the business about a year, everything was very free flowing for you. You had no problem, with it. Just to give an example of a spot, when you do a reverse and to reverse a hip toss or something, everything came very natural to you.
And I don't know, I really don't know, why that was, but I was just very comfortable.
Yeah, so it's natural.
Moves,
it's just natural.
In those moves and those turns and doing those things. So it looked natural at the time when you saw it. Now, if you'd seen that first year and a half, maybe not quite so much, because I wasn't sure which way you were supposed to go.
You learned on the job, though.
Yes, yeah, you do. And if you have a passion for it, and you got people in your ear every night critiquing it, telling you what to do, how to make it better, and you're constantly a student, because it didn't matter if you'd been doing it 5 months or 10 years, you could still learn a little nuance to make something better, make something more believable, some other aspect of it, because it was like improvisational the way we did it. So you were constantly expanding your repertoire of things that you did. It's like Dusty said, hey, we were in the Crockett Cup tournament. He said, hey, you think you could catch Tiger Mask when he jumps off the top and give him that belly to belly? And I said, yeah, we can do that. I've never done that in my life. We're in the Crockett tournament. I've never met Tiger Mask. He's over from Japan. He's on the other side. And here he comes diving off the top. Okay, I don't know how big he is, but I had to catch him and turn him so he didn't land on his head, and it worked out. But it was different back then, because everybody everybody had a different perception. There's my wife sticking around.
Hello.
Hey,
You know what?
Hello.
Hello. We should have a double podcast sometime. Hello.
Hello.
They're in Ireland.
I can tell.
It's a lovely accent, isn't it?
It's perfect.
It's very perfect. We're not Conor McGregor, don't worry. Courtney.
Yes.
Yes, Courtney.
See? I remember.
You remember? They're very good.
See, we're pals. Of course, I have to remember your wife's name. Before we wind down now, as we kind of close off the show, I just kind of, I don't want to talk about the accident and stuff like that. We've said that before. Don't like talking about the accident. I like talking about the positive stuff, but the positive things that have come from the accident. Talk to me about that.
Well, the fact of the matter is, your wrestling is, once it's in your DNA, and once you're in this group, this brotherhood, you're in it for life. Right?
Mental.
And it was never even in my plan, which obviously wasn't the plan in the grand scheme of things. It was never my plan to wrestle past like 30, 35 years old tops, because I wanted to be physically at the top of my game and be remembered that way. I didn't know I was going to be remembered that way because of what happened. But the fact of the matter is a couple things. First, I got, by the grace of God, I walk out of a hospital 5 months after I've been told, I've got 1,000,000 to 1 shot I've ever walked. So, that's a great big old positive. For an athlete, it's a really bittersweet pill because we have such high expectations of ourselves. If I'd been a professional businessman or something, I would have been able to quickly return to a level of performance that was very much like what I was accustomed to before. But because I had such high expectations of myself physically, it made it, a challenge. I had to shift a lot of my thinking. I had to use a lot of the same mental discipline I'd used to train to become a wrestler, the disciplines that I'd used to go through all the months and months and months of rehab that I did after the accident. I had to start applying those things into my life in other ways. And still to this day, the physical effort that I exert just to do the simplest of tasks, equates to what I used to do 20 minutes in the ring. And I still use physical skill sets, but just in a totally different way. Mindset just has to be shifted where you realize that level of accomplishment, even though the outside world doesn't like a big deal, but for me to be able to be independent and be able to take care of myself and work and provide for my family and be ambulatory and all those things 30 some years after the fact is kind of a big deal, especially in the culture that I come from in wrestling, where most guys didn't have any plan B, C, D, or E. They either wrestled or they were lost. So I was very fortunate to be able to use, some mental disciplines that I've used my entire life and apply them into other avenues of life. But more importantly, I've been able to through what I've done, and I don't mean in the way of accomplishments, but by persevering and not becoming a statistic, I've shown people that, the proof is in the pudding. The things that I said in the interviews that I made after the accident, the things that I said I was going to apply and do, I've done. And I continue to do, because if it inspires somebody else not to quit or not to give up because of some adversity they're facing in their life or unmet expectations of some dream that was unfulfilled, and they find another way to find another dream or another passion or something else to sink their teeth into their efforts, then to me, that's a greater accomplishment than anything I ever did professionally, anywhere, anytime. And I didn't go get on a soapbox to go try to preach to the masses or use my injury as a forum to go out there and be a motivational speaker or those things. I've tried to live my life in the public eye through social media, through the things that are available to us now, and just for folks to see that, hey, you can have a normal life no matter, what kind of crazy adversities get thrown at you. And, that's what I've chosen to do. And it is. Every day we get up, we have a choice. We can either face it, go make the best of what we've got to work with and make the best of our 24 hours, or we could sit around and ponder the past and all the woulda, shoulda, couldas and all those things and just live on a pity pot. And I'm not wired like that.
Well, Noel, I can't add anything to that. Like, I can't.
No, there's nothing really you can add to that. It's an amazing story, an amazing athlete, provided me with hours and weeks and months of unbelievable entertainment as a 12-year-old back in the day. And there was only one other thing I wanted to ask you was, Nikita ends up, considering your history with Nikita and the American Russian thing and all this kind of thing, and all of a sudden Nikita gets put with Dusty and they become the superpowers. Well, how did you feel about that? What was you thinking on that?
Oh, it was a stroke of genius. I mean, Dusty talked to me about it, and I mean, I was in ICU for 30 days. I was on a respirator, couldn't talk. I was in this rotokinetic bed thing that went back and forth constantly, but Dusty kept me abreast of every step, everything that he did, and it was genius to capitalize on a horrendous situation. Unfortunately, and I'll say this publicly, it wasn't the best thing for Nikita's career. What would have been better for Nikita's career would have been for him and I to have furthered our feud down the road, and him to stay that monster heel for a while longer, because he didn't have the experience in the ring time to have been able to learn all the lessons that I've learned, those several years I had before I got the big opportunity on top. They took him, made this monster out of him. He didn't have it. So you can do that, but somebody has really got to take care of that person to keep them in the light that you want them to shine in. And Nikita wasn't surrounded then by heels that treated him with the same level of respect that I did to make him, this monster that he was. And of course, you've got to be a little bit different as a babyface than he was as a heel, but he got lost in the shuffle. The Nikita, the big monster Nikita that I battled with was not the babyface Nikita 6 months later that he ultimately could have been. And it's unfortunate. I mean, he had things happen in his life too. I mean, he lost his wife. I mean, he had all kinds of personal traumas along with it, but nonetheless, his story, instead of being best remembered for just the best of 7 series, which was phenomenal, but that legacy should have gone on a little bit farther in some other directions as he got to expand that character. And I mean, Dusty took care of him when they were the superpowers and as he could in those situations. But when you put him out there as a single with heels that weren't as vested in him as the rest of us were, he didn't come off looking as good as he should have.
Well, yeah, like it was, because it wasn't like Ivan Koloff or something like that. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he was, as you said, he was a gimmick guy. So he didn't get that kind of education that you got as the babyface. Because as the babyface, you're the guy that's meant to bring in the crowd. You know what I mean? You got to put asses in seats. You know what I mean? And that's the pressure. You got to sell. You got to know how to work with any kind of shape, size, or being. It doesn't matter who it is. But that's just my 2 cents. You know more.
Well, no, it's true. It's true. And a baby face has got, like you said, they got to be able to talk them into the building.
Yeah.
They've got to paint the picture of who they are.
Absolutely.
And why they are who they are in the ring with their opponent. Then they've got to be able to, like you said, they've got to be able to sell. And you got to learn the difference in registering something, selling something, and dying. And you don't ever want to die, because when you die, you lose the people. But it's harder work to sell than it is to shine.
Yep.
You put more energy you put way more energy in fighting from the bottom up than you do, somebody bumping for you and flying all around and, making you look like Superman.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I think this is, Noel, do you want to add anything to that before we?
No, nothing really. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure for me. This is just amazing to be sharing a screen with you and stuff like that. And I personally cannot thank you enough for what you provided for me back then and stuff like that. It's just incredible.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I do want to say this too. I think what's so magic about this and with a lot of my contemporaries, we made people go back to a time and they remember how it made them feel. You remember relationships, you remember family members, you remember a time in your life when things were different. And that is so amazing that it generates those kind of emotions and brings back those flood of memories. And I don't think there's another sport or entertainment that ties all those same things together in a package as neatly as we were able to do those many years ago. And I think that's what makes so many people have such a fond passion and memories, because I was a fan first too. My first memories of watching television or sitting on a couch with my dad when I was like 6, 7 years old, watching Mid-Atlantic. So, it's all a big circle that goes round and round, and we've all got those stories and memories to share because of it.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. And it's true. It's so true. I mean, I read a WCW magazine saying like, oh, what it takes to get to the power plant, 3,000 squats a day and 1,000 push-ups a day. And I remember going like, 13 years old, going like, I'm just going to squat, and I didn't know how to squat, but I was trying my best. I'm just like, I'll do my best. But it's true, isn't it? It's it was from a more innocent time, from a more probably real time as well. I think we would say. I think nowadays, in the world of social media, I think people don't know the difference within realism and kind of just whatever you're meant to think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For me, Magnum, I'm going to keep calling you Magnum on this show, but I know you as Terry. You've been so kind to me. You've been very nice to me over a long period of time, to be fair. I really do thank you for coming on to the show today. And I know Niall definitely has appreciated it as well. You brought him back to a time.
Yeah, it was just, that programming always left me hanging each week. There was always a run in or an attack backstage or an angle that left us hanging for the next week and the next week and the next week. And it went on for me just for years. It was just amazing. And I have a green screen behind me here with this graphics, but Magnum, I could show you stuff behind this green screen, but I won't. It's for another day. Figures and all sorts of stuff like that.
It's kind of like with me, like I do have, it's like my trainer was Finn Balor. I was like, I can't buy myself a Finn Balor, figure, but I have one in the, in the whole demon kind of outfit. And it's like, but he was my coach. It's like, I can't buy a normal one of him without the demon, because at least he has makeup, because it'd be just weird. But like, imagine coming over to someone's house and going, hey, why have you got a figure of me? And I have a figure of you, Terry. And it's like, I feel weird even having it now, because we're always talking. It's like, what the fuck? It's like,
that's all right. I've got one of Dusty and I too, so don't feel bad.
Okay, that's good. That makes me feel
better. Cool. Well, on that note, so I want to share with you. So I've partnered up with a couple of guys, Greg Gagne and a fellow named Steve Rosenthal, who was involved in making toys back in the 70s and 80s. And I've joined up with them in a company that's going to produce memorabilia for wrestlers back from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right on along.
Hell yeah.
And do it in such a way to, first of all, bring collectibles to the fans from eras that things weren't available back when Lou Theszes of the world were, the world champion and things like that, but also building a platform that's going to give back and help the retired wrestlers themselves and their families for those that have deceased. And this company's called Relativity Worldwide. And we're going to have some things launched next year, 2022. But I'm part of the company, and I'm helping them promote it and helping them put it together. But we've currently got 100 people on the roster, and we're not announcing the names yet. It's going to be coming out in launches. But keep your eyes peeled on my social media, because I'll be posting stuff about it as it happens. But it's exciting, and it's going to be a way to tell some stories of things from the past and in wrestling history and heritages and things that we're all proud of, but also a way to give back to people that provided all this entertainment and made all these memories over the years for so many people, and didn't have pensions and didn't have things to fall back on like other sports athletes do today. And so we're trying to create something that's going to be a help as well as create a memorabilia that'll be something collectors can look forward to also.
Awesome.
Well, that's something that we will 100% be a part of, and share anything that you want, without a shadow of a doubt. That's something that means a lot to me personally. So I will 100%, and so will Noel. We will, we'll put any links that you have in the bottom of the video, and from our social media, we'll do it on a personal level as well. So
you won't have
awesome.
to worry. You won't have to worry about selling the Magnum, because me and Ian will just buy the whole lot.
Yeah,
there you go.
probably true. And then our whole community will probably buy it as well. So it'll be grand.
Absolutely.
Well, good deal.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been an absolute
But I think it is time to finish now. It's been amazing. Magnum, you are, in my opinion, one of the best pro wrestlers of all time. You may not have been here for a long time, but you left a goddamn legacy behind you. And I just think your work was beautiful. You're a great guy in general, and thank you so much for coming on again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Noel?
Yeah, nothing I can add to that. An absolute pleasure. Just thank you so much for taking the time to come on and giving us an insight into some of those times and stuff like that. It's for me, it's nostalgia. You look at my arm, there's hairs up on my arm at the moment talking about this stuff. This is what it meant to me back then, So absolute pleasure sharing a screen with you. Absolute legend.
Yeah,